This is George from High Tech Legion. As you can probably guess, just taking a look at what's sitting here, it's a really interesting time in cooling. Typically, we only see a really viable contender for a top spot in cooling come along once every couple of years. The NHD14 held it for years, then barely got nudged out by the Fantex 14PE, and I mean just barely nudged out. And since then, we really haven't seen anything, that came close. But right now, we're sitting here looking at three coolers that really conceivably could take over a top spot. We're looking at the CryoRig R1, the Noctua NHD15, which is the follow-up to the NHD14, and we're also looking at a 240 millimeter closed-loop liquid cooler, the Zalman Reserator 3 Max, which is looking to be the best 240 millimeter closed-loop cooler on the market. So definitely very, very interesting time. CryoRig, newcomer to the market. Zalman and Noctua, who have been in cooling for a long time, have a lot of experience, and also have brought a lot to the table in the past. So now we're going to dig in and we're going to throw these guys up against the 14PE, the Noctua NHD14, and the Zalman's going to go up against its brethren in the 240 millimeter category. And of course, we're going to see crossover with the 240 millimeters and the Air as well. So good time to be looking at it, and we're going to have a serious throwdown between some really big coolers here. We're going to be taking a look at the Zalman Reserator 3 Max Dual. And, initial reaction to it might be, hey, what is this crazy thing? Well, actually, it is a closed-loop cooler, but it is significantly different than anything we've seen before. I mean, you just take a look at it, and obviously not anything like what we've seen in closed-loop cooling or in any radiators really, even for open-loop previously. So it is very different. But, I've learned long ago when I get products from Zalman, some of their craziest-looking products that seem to make no sense often have the best performance, and I've seen that time and time again. So I'm obviously not going to discount this in any way, shape, or form. Now, getting a quick look at the box, obviously, big Reserator Max Dual on the front with a picture of the unit itself. A couple of the features listed out on the back. Customized quadro radiator structure, which we'll take a look at, anti-corrosion, elegant black-plated nickel heatsink. One of the nice things about this, the tubes in heatsink are copper. They're not aluminum like we're used to seeing on closed-loop coolers. Cooling efficiency maximized cooling path, microfin copper base, high-performance embedded water pump, efficient VRM cooling, blue LED on both the pump as well as the fans. Support multi-bracket can be mounted in most ATX cases, and excellent hermeticity, basically meaning it's pre-filled and the liquid's not going anywhere. Now, moving over to the side, get a couple of more of the interesting specs here. Obviously, two 120 millimeter fans, and taking a look, they're both 1,000 to 2,300 RPM, and as far as the noise, 23.2 to a max of 46.6 dBA. I mean, that's a little scary, that number right there. It is a little bit on the loud side, that's for sure. They are PWM, as you see here. The other number of note is that the fact that the radiator with fan structure is 73 millimeters thick. So take that into consideration. Now we're going to see it does come with an offset bracket, which makes installation quite a bit easier, but you do want to keep that in mind that it is 73 millimeters thick. The Reserator 3 Max Dual uses a really interesting structure. First off, let's take a quick look at the pump. Obviously, copper base. Really nice mill on the base itself, as you can see here, with the pump up top, and does have blue LED. So not too thick, comes in right about, I'm going to say about 40 millimeters thick. So it does stand out a bit, but obviously not really a concern. You've got the 1 3-pin coming off for power, and rubber tubes, which go up to the center of the Reserator 3 Max Dual. Now, like I say, this is really a different looking type of unit here. So let's start around the back. And what you can see here is you've got the two radial heat sinks that we've seen Zalman use before in the past in the CNPS series, and it works very, very well. The actual flow of the liquid As you can see, they use the octaflow path, which is similar to the what they were using for their heat pipes in the CNPS series. So you actually come up and it loops around, loops back around, goes down, loops back, then loops back again, then over, and repeats on the other side. So you've got an actual 8-path loop for on each side, I should say. So it's an 8-path octaloop in total. So you've got quite a bit going on there. Now, pipes themselves that the water is running through, once again, copper, not aluminum. The heatsink material itself, copper, not aluminum. That's actually a big deal. Copper is a much better heat dissipation material than aluminum is. So it's naturally going to have much better passive type cooling. So we're hoping we're going to see a little bit better results as far as the actual cooling itself. Now, interestingly, the fans are changeable. And as you can see, they're wired. They come up through here and plug into the unit itself, which then has one single plug coming off in order to power your fans. Is a 4-pin PWM plug. Fans are PWM, as I had said. The housing itself, all clear, as you see, and the fans in front are clear with blue LED. Now, we've got some really interesting things going on here. Now, another thing that Zalman uses in the Reserator 3 Max tool, I should say, is the use of nanoparticles in the cooling fluid itself. Now, like I say, it comes pre-filled. There's no maintenance. You never have to touch anything with the fluid. But Zalman's actually using nanoparticles in the fluid, making it a little bit better of a heat conductor, so it should provide better cooling theoretically. Now, the pipe, or the tubes, I should say, come right down out of the pipes, right in the center of the unit. So when you're mounting up top of the case, it can drop straight down to the CPU, as we're going to see in just a minute. So really, all in all, a really cool looking piece, like I say. But keep in mind the thickness, and you'll see with the offset exactly how it mounts up, even in a case that might not necessarily, you would think, have the room for it. So really interesting design from Zalman. Very interested to see how it's going to perform once we get it in the case. The installation kit for the Reserator 3 Max Dual, actually very, very simple, not a whole lot of parts. First off, of course, manual, well illustrated, not the biggest illustrations in the world, but actually very well illustrated, and it's not a very complex install, so definitely does the job there. One size fits all backplate, AMD and Intel mounts. The 4 offset brackets that we talked about earlier, we're going to see exactly how they work. They're going to play an important part in most cases as far as getting this mounted, unless you've got a real lot of room up top in your case. Your nuts and bolts for AMD and Intel, small tube of thermal grease, and Zalman case badge right there. Now, I do want to point out in terms of fans, the Zalman included fans are standard 120 millimeter fan mounting, so you can change the fans. Like I say, they are wired through the back, so you will have to run the wiring up and through. That's not a huge deal, obviously. So you can change the fans to any fan you like. You can also go with a push-pull, mounting fans on the back without a problem. Standard 120 millimeter fan mounting all around. Moving on to the installation of the Reserator 3 Max Dual, there is some prep work that needs to be done prior to moving on to the case. First thing you're going to want to do, need to attach your bracket to your CPU block or pump. Putting the Intel on, obviously AMD goes on the same way. As you see, the notch goes away from the plate itself, and it's 8 screws right into the pump housing to get it in. One thing I will tell you, they don't necessarily all line up perfectly. Don't snug them until you've got all 8 screws hand tight. You can then go around and snug them all up. Again, don't need to be crazy tight, just snug. Once you've got that on, we can move on to the back plate. Back plate does need the pins installed. So you have installed 3. Once again, same for AMD, only do it upside down, but same process, all 4 corners. If you're doing an AMD, obviously, you put the nut into the notch and the holder will go over. But we're doing Intel. Always remember the head of the nut sits in the notch. You've got the 3 holes as always, 775, 1150, 55, 56, and 1366. We're doing 1155. Put it through the correct hole. Take your clip, push it over and into place, and it'll snap over the nut itself. Your back plate is then assembled. And finally, we've got the brackets. So we talked about the offset brackets for the top. They too need assembly, and when they're assembled to look like this, again, you've got pins. You need to go through from the bottom. Now, this is actually important. When you're holding and looking at the bracket itself, the curve should be to the right and it should come up and through. The retainer has an A and a B. The A needs to face up, and just push it into place. Slide it all the way, and the nut will lock into place, and you can then move it, and the nut will stay with it as you make adjustments. So yeah, you do have a bit of prep work, that's for sure, in getting this ready to go into the case. But now that we've got all our parts assembled and ready for the case, we're going to move on and get it on the motherboard. Yeah, I mentioned a couple times how important those offset brackets are going to be, and I want to show you exactly why. Coming down, as you see, when you try and mount this, come over, you're hitting the RAM, you're hitting the 8-pin on the motherboard. That's as far over as it can go. You can't actually reach the mounting points on the case. So if your case is centered or it doesn't have, some kind of crazy setup, obviously it's not going to mount. So the offset brackets allow you to mount it a little bit further out. It's going to wind up right about here, as you'll see. So you still get good airflow without needing to, or I should say without it impeding on any of the motherboard components. So it will fit a lot easier. Now with the brackets in place, obviously you want to make sure all of your fittings line up. So when you put it in, have no problems. As you can see, they just go on with 4 screws on each of the fan sides. So you're good to go. And we can now drop it into place, or I should say raise it into place. And as you can see, going in, you now have no issue with motherboard clearance problems. And the unit itself sits quite a bit further out. So we can just get it lined up. Those screws into place, and the radiator is installed. Now that I've got the radiator and fans in place, we're going to move on to the pump. Before I do want to point out, one of the big things about CLCs that everybody says, well, now, I've got room to fit, giant RAM. Not the case here. The fan actually just about touches the standard height A data that we have in here, as you see. So standard height RAM only. You're not going to be fitting any Vengeance, any Trident, anything of that nature, anything with a larger heatsink. Standard size RAM is going to be the only thing that fits, even with the offset bracket, just because of how low this does hang down. So now I've gone ahead and applied the thermal interface material to the CPU, as you see. First, take our back plate, as you see, and we're going to go around back. And get it into place. As you see, the 4 nuts will come through the motherboard. They do provide double-sided tape that you can use with the backplate if you like to hold it in place. Personally, I'm not a big fan of putting tape on my motherboard, so I'm not using it. So once that's in place, we can just bring the pump into place. And the 4 screws will simply go into the 4 nuts. As always, when you're tightening the screws, do so in an X pattern. Tighten a little bit here, there, and keep going. They do have a stop on them, so simply tighten until you feel the stop. Do not over tighten. So finally, you've got power hookup, 4-pin PWM, which will go to your CPU fan header, and 3-pin for the pump, which you want to going to something that's going to be constant 12 volt. So system fan header, just make sure you disable any fan control in the BIOS. You want the constant 12 volt going to the pump, or even you could do it to a CPU header as long as you weren't using any type of fan control. But obviously, you do want to go to a three-pin constant 12 volt. You can also go straight to your power supply using an adapter. All right, so end of the day, you wind up with a really nice, clean install. As you can see, you do get the glowing LEDs on the fans themselves, as well as the pump. We do have a little bit of pump noise, but really that's not my concern. Earlier I had said, just looking at the specs on the fans, those noise levels were a bit of a concern. As you can probably hear right now, the computer's idling and the fans are clearly audible. As a matter of fact, they're probably about as loud as something like an Octo NHD15, CryoRig R1, or a Fantex 14PE at max while, this is idling. So I do have concerns about that, but we're going to see how it goes when it gets under load. But the install overall, like I say, it was a little overcomplicated at times, but nothing too bad as far as, actually being difficult. It went in, just like I say, maybe a few too many steps that were a little unnecessary. Okay, so getting a look at the benchmarks here and taking a look strictly at the numbers. First off, we started out with the all of our test coolers with fans maxed out. So we're going to see what it can do, maximum levels. Now, obviously, looking at stock with a max fan is not a challenge for any of the coolers in this test. But if you take a look, one thing we do see here, the Reserator 3 Dual Max is topping out at 63 dB. That's, really considerably high. No question about that. But as you see, it's keeping up with, the best of the coolers and, keeping up with the H100i and the Glacier 240L as far as max noise output. Now, we bumped up the clock because obviously, you're moving into an enthusiast cooler at this kind of price point. You're not going to be throwing it on a stock cooler. You're going to be throwing it on an overclocked chip. We took our 4770K, brought it up to 4.4 gigahertz at 1.206 volts. Still at max fans, and you see the Zalman sticks right there with the H100i and is actually, just 1 dB quieter, no problem there. The problem, or the only problem I should say here is that, the CLCs here do start lagging behind the big air coolers, and they are considerably louder, and, the Zalman's no exception there. Also, when you look at the open loop right next to it, the Cooler Master Glacier 240L, you've got a bit of a gap there, to say the least, as far as temperatures. Now, we're going to quiet things down here. Let's see what this cooler can do if we keep the noise under 40 dB. So what we've done, we've adjusted all our fan speeds out on all of our units to keep everything under 40 dB. Now, as you see here with the stock CPU clocks, not a problem at all. Really doesn't have much effect. Great cooling, and now you're getting low noise and great cooling. But like I say, you're not going to be throwing, a cooler of this ilk onto, a stock chip. So now bumping up the temperatures, still keeping everything quiet. And this is where things kind of come apart for both the CLCs and the test. The Zalman, once again, following the H100i in this respect. And it actually is a little better than the H100i, as you see, at the actual performance, keeping the chip cool, running a degree cooler. But once you quiet things down to 40 dB, as you can see, you've got an 8-degree gap between that and the open loop cooler. You've got an 8-degree gap between that and the CryoRig R1 Ultimate, and some pretty big gaps between the Noctua and the Fantex as well. But like I say, as far as a 240 millimeter CLC, it's absolutely keeping up with the best of the best. The Reserator 3 Max Dual has a lot of interesting stuff going on. Looking at it purely from a CLC perspective, really, it's a complete knockout. First off, it's a great looking cooler, as you see. Very unique looking, not another cookie cutter Ace Tech Cool It Made unit. You take a look, complete different take on how to put together a radiator, as you see. Also, really nice, you've got the built-in Y connector with just a single 4-pin dropping down for the fans. Great looking unit, all clear design, looks fantastic in the case. Got the clear fans, like we say, with the really nice blue LED. Zalman's always done really, really nice blue LEDs. Not overbearing, different tone than we're used to seeing, and they've got more of a solid look to them than most of the LEDs. Now, in terms of performance, once again, looking at it strictly as a CLC, It kept up with what is the best of the 240 millimeter CLCs out there. It matched an H100i, absolutely, blow for blow without a problem. Now, also, along with it, it matched the H100i as far as noise output, but that is the nature of the beast with the CLCs. There's no question about that. And of course, when you bring the noise down, performance suffers. But, and it suffered accordingly as much as the H100i. So, very interesting. I do like the pump quite a bit. It actually moves, quite a bit more liquid than we're used to seeing from either the Ace Tech or the Cool-It pumps. Really nice rubber tubing. It's very, very well constructed, very nicely made. Now, conversely, putting it in, I would have liked to have seen more assembly from the factory and a little bit less in terms of little parts to put together before you actually install it. It's not a complicated install, it's not difficult, but it is time consuming, lots of little parts, just can be a little bit nagging and take a little bit longer than it should have. Once it's in, looks great, like I say. However, something to keep in mind, we used a pretty big mid-tower, the Phantom 530, which is actually probably among the largest of what is considered a mid-tower. And we still had a problem with interference with components on the motherboard. I mean, if you're going to a full tower with a really tall roof, you're probably not going to run into a problem. But most people aren't using them. If you're going into a mid-tower, you're likely going to run into a problem, even with the offset brackets, where you're not going to be able to use taller RAM. And, that's one of the big reasons a lot of people go to CLCs is so they can fit the giant RAM, on the motherboard. So that is a consideration right there. Definitely something you want to take into account. Now, also, you look at it, it's, priced out $119 retail and, only $10 more. The Cooler Master Glacier 240L really kind of handed it to it as far as performance, especially at the lower noise marks. So, $10 more, you've got a cooler that's really performing a lot better, especially at lower noise. And on the other end, you had $85 air coolers performing a little bit better with significantly less noise. And when I say significantly, I'm talking, over 20 dB less noise, sometimes 25 dB less noise, and outperforming it. So that is a consideration. Now, however, when you're using it day-to-day tasks, very quiet. It's a little bit louder than the H100i was when it's idling and whatnot. It does have a little bit of fan noise, a little bit of pump noise, but nothing drastic. So, day-to-day tasks, it's fine. But when you get a load on the CPU and the fans do ramp up, it does get a bit noisy. Now, overall, I'm going to give the Zalman Reserator Max 3 Dual a silver award. Like I say, it keeps up with the best of the 240 millimeter CLCs, but $10 more, you're into an open loop. With the Cooler Master Glacier SwiftTech H220 that, is going to offer better performance. By the same token, spending less money on an air cooler, you're going to get better you have the option of getting better performance to noise, etc. And you do have the problem with the component interference. So, silver award for the Reserator Max Dual, but I really do have a lot of hopes for this platform. I think it's a great idea that Zalman's come up with, their radiator design, and I'm looking forward to seeing more in the future of what they can do with it.